Hi, everyone. I'm Eli Sherman with WPRI.com. I'm joined today by Cranston City Councilor and Democratic mayoral candidate Steve Stykos, who's here to talk with me about his campaign to become the city's next mayor. The primary election is scheduled for Tuesday, September 8th. Councilman, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So just to start off, I want to ask you a straightforward question about why it is that you're running and why you think the voters of Cranston should support you.
Well, I think of all the candidates running, I have the most experience. I've been on the school committee for 10 years and more recently on the city council for 10 years. And in the last election, when I ran citywide for the council, I was the top vote getter. So I felt that was an endorsement of the work that I've done. And I've accomplished a lot through things like starting community gardens, starting a tree planting program in the city, being an advocate for careful spending of city money, and an advocate for public education.
Great. And so to that point, you mentioned that you spent the last decade working as a city councilor, and you spent the decade before that working as a school committee member. So you have 20 years of experience in city government. What is it that you think you can get done as mayor that you weren't able to accomplish in those other two positions of leadership?
Well, obviously the mayor has more control over the city government than anyone else. So with the coronavirus, I think we're going to have a very difficult financial time, and we need to have a mayor who can say no to people who want to spend money because we don't have it. And we also need a mayor who's going to be committed to public education. So those are two of the big rules, and then big reasons. And then the various environmental things that I've worked on, I would continue to work on, hopefully expanding community gardens, improving parks, particularly in urban areas, protecting open space. And another key issue that really is in the mayor's hands is diversifying the city's workforce. Because right now we have a population in Cranston that is 28% people of color, but only 3% of the full-time workforce are people of color. And the mayor is the one who makes the hiring decisions and directs recruitment for various jobs. So that would be another priority of mine.
Great. You touched on something I want to hammer down on a little bit, the coronavirus crisis. Obviously, that is affecting all parts of life, but definitely in municipal budget processing, it continues to remain unclear whether or not federal and state support is going to be there for cities and towns. You're running on a current budget that started technically in July, but it's still not clear whether or not you're getting that state aid that is in there. One of the first things that the mayor may have to do, the next mayor after taking office, is putting together a really painful budget. And I'm wondering if there are some specific areas where you think that there can be cuts or savings found or new opportunities to generate revenue that the city's just not currently collecting on.
Well, first of all, I agree with your analysis. I think it's going to be not only putting the next budget together, but looking at the prospective deficit in the current budget. I voted against the mayor's budget recently because I thought the revenue projections were unrealistic, particularly from the state aid, which was basically level funded in the mayor's budget. And I don't think that's going to happen. And the schools are, not only are they short on what they wanted for a budget, but because of no clear decision on state aid, but they're also being asked to teach in a completely different environment and have extra costs associated with that that I don't think we have a handle on yet. So as far as how to handle that, I think you have to look first. You meet with your department directors and you say, if you were going to cut 10% of your budget, where would you cut it? And then you start making decisions that way. The city does have a pretty healthy surplus, also known as the rainy day fund, and that some of that is a possibility to be used to close the gap. I mean, it's supposed to be for emergencies, and I think most of us have not seen anything like this in our lifetimes. So that's another possibility. And as far as taxes, people are very concerned. They don't want their taxes raised. And it's going to have to be looked at. And I think to say, as some candidates have, oh, I won't raise taxes. We have labor contracts in place with pay raises, and costs go up. So to say blanketly that you're not going to raise taxes during your 4-year term is just it's just not realistic, and it's something that Alan Fung wasn't able to do. He did raise taxes. Sometimes I voted for them, and sometimes I voted against them, but it has to be part of the equation to be considered.
I want to ask you about the current mayor. You mentioned him, Mayor Alan Fung. He's obviously leaving because of term limits, and has served the city as in the top job for the last 12 years. And you have been serving in some capacity concurrent to him, beginning with the school committee at the beginning, but mostly with the city council. I'm just wondering, A through F, what grade would you give his performance over that time, and why?
Oh, I have to grade him, huh? Well, let's do the why first, and then maybe I can think of the grade. I think he's been generally fairly careful with the city funds. So I think that's a positive. I think he's articulate and is a good public face for the city. He dresses much better than I do. On the critical side, number one, I will not run for governor or secretary of state or any of those statewide offices. My attention will be to the city of Cranston, and I think the city needs that. It also needs a mayor that will sit down and talk with people, even if those people want to call him a jerk. And I have done that as a city councilman, and I think that's part of the job, is to listen to people and try to address their complaints directly. What the mayor tends to do is refer just about everything to his staff, and that also includes his dealings with the city council. So I think that would be a difference that I would have, is I would deal more directly with the city council so that they would know my thinking and we would have the opportunity to convince each other directly and compromise rather than working through third parties. The ticket gate scandal was a real black eye for the mayor. That is something that I exposed. I was one of the councilmen who was targeted with tickets, called for a state police investigation with Paul Arquetto, and we reformed the police department. And the chief was moved out, the number 2 was moved out, and the union president. And when we look around the country with all the crises that we see in various police departments, what we were able to do in Cranston, the city council was able to do, was reform our police department without anyone getting hurt. So I think that is also an indication of what I would do is I would confront problems that were left to fester in the police department, and I would confront them in wherever I found them.
So where does that put his grade?
Ha! I was hoping you'd forget. I guess I'd give him a C minus.
C minus. Okay. Um, to the question of Democrat v. Republican, Mayor Fung obviously is a Republican, but there are more Democrats than Republicans registered in the city of Cranston, and even though half the electorate is independent. I'm wondering if you're successful in securing the Democratic nominee on September 8th, how do you feel about your chances against the Republican nominee come November, and why?
Well, I think they're good. I wouldn't have run if I didn't think they were good. The reason I think that is because in the citywide election, I won over Republican candidates who were incumbents, had run citywide before, and I was the top vote getter. So that indicates that it can be done. I also am very hopeful, frankly, that this will be a heavy turnout election because of Donald Trump's just outrageous behavior and handling of the presidency, and that people will turn out. Democratic voters will turn out, who I think everyone knows tend not to turn out as much as Republican voters do. So I think that's another plus. And I think I have a message and a record that people have watched. I think people will say, you know, I don't agree with them on everything, but they appreciate that I'm active, I'm thinking, I'm discussing issues, and I'm getting things accomplished.
Right now, what would you say is the single biggest challenge facing Cranston? And if you were mayor, what would you do to address it?
Well, I think it's the schools, and in the projected state budget, the schools were targeted for $4 million more in state aid, and we were told on the city council that if we voted that as part of the budget, that the city would be on the hook for that $4 million if the state didn't come through. So the council unanimously, Democrats and Republicans, removed that $4 million. That, of course, doesn't solve the problem that the schools need more money to function, especially with the strictures of the COVID virus. So that's really, I think, the biggest problem that we face.
Great. And finally, I want to wrap up here, and I know that it's kind of been a brief conversation. So I just want to give you an opportunity, if, this is sort of the final days of the election, if you have a message for the voters, what would you say to them who may not yet be decided on how they're going to vote come September 8th?
Well, I'd say that I'm not just talking about things that I've done them. So I talk about the school budget being important. This last time, amendments that I offered added $45,000. The ones that they passed added $45,000 to the school budget. The last year, I offered amendments that added $35,000 to the school budget. And those were by moving money from other areas in the city budget. So I've done that. You might argue that it should be more money. Not every amendment that I offered passed, but I've done that. None of the other candidates this last budget offered any amendments to increase school aid. So I've done those things. I've also stood up for openness in government. We have an ice rink that's a $750,000 operation. That was nowhere in the city budget. I brought that up. I pushed it. It took me several years, but if you pick up a city budget now, you'll see the ice rink in there. You can tell what people are paid, And that's important for citizens. And it's also important for us when we're trying to control costs, is to know where the money's being spent. So I've done that. I've spoken out for diversity. I have not made any progress because the mayor makes the decision on hiring. So those would be really my big message would be, judge me not on what I say, but what I've done. I have a website, stevestykos.com. You can check that out. You can ask me questions through that website or through my phone. And I thank you for doing this. And the more educated the public is on elections, the better off we are as a country.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Cranston City Councilor and Democratic mayoral candidate Steve Stykos. He is running in the Democratic primary, which people can go vote for on September 8th. For much more on this race and about Steve and his campaign, visit WPRI.com.